Okay, are we good to get started?
I think we're good to go.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everybody. There is quite a lot of competition for these panels, these presentations. I don't know how I would have chosen if I were in your shoes. So I am very grateful that you are here right now. And I think you're going to be glad that you are here too after these talks. So I'll just jump in because with 15 minutes, there is a lot of ground to cover. My goodness.
You're already cutting
Thanks, Chris. Let's jump in. So a quick bit about Standing Trees. Standing Trees works to protect New England's public lands. We were founded just about 4 years ago. We work on education and movement building. I would say that is more or less what we're doing here today. Legislation and policy advocacy, we'll talk a bit about that. And we do legal defense work as well. I'm going to try not to go too quickly, but that may be a consequence of the tight time frame that we have here. If I was to tell you a story of the most important moments that have shaped my life, most important experiences, I could tell you that story based on this map. This is a map of what? What is this map showing? It's the United States, and Tom gets the award here. These are roads in dark black lines in our lower 48 states. And I've, for my whole life, have sought out the blank spots on this map. I was very lucky to, right after high school, go to work for the U.S. Forest Service in the North Cascades, which was a very formative experience for me. I spent 10 years working in the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem and the Central Idaho network of wildlands in some of the most amazing wild places that we have, and spending a lot of time in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem as well. And then came back to New England, where I'm from, and so grateful today to live smack in the middle of some of our largest wildlands here in the Northeast, in Montpelier, with amazing wild places all around us. Those are the places that have shaped me more than anything else, the experiences that have shaped me. So like I said, I was so lucky right out of high school to take advantage of the AmeriCorps program that is no longer afforded by our government, tragically, through the Student Conservation Association, doing work as a wilderness ranger for the U.S. Forest Service, something that made my career, the reason I'm standing here, possible. And something that we all need to commit ourselves to is to making sure that those opportunities are available for upcoming generations. I tell you what, it is a good thing to get out of Dodge. And it was great to leave New England as soon as I could. 1 week after barely graduating from high school, I was on a plane heading to the North Cascades. And that set me again on this path that I'm on today. It took me to Missoula, where I went to school at the University of Montana. And that path took me to like I said, the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex, where for that decade that I worked in Montana, was trying to expand the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex. This landscape is the Scapegoat Wilderness. Never mind the very unusual name Scapegoat. This is one of the most important wild places in the United States that I'm guessing you may never have heard of before. And the Scapegoat, established in 1972 by congressional designation, was the very first time that citizens had initiated a wilderness designation process and seen it through to the end. Between 1964, when the Wilderness Act passed, and 1972, all of the wilderness additions under the Wilderness Act came at the direction of the U.S. Forest Service. We are okay with this wilderness. Congress, you designate it. The Forest Service wanted to put a huge road into what was called the Lincoln Backcountry in the Blackfoot River Valley headwaters in Montana. They were going to develop recreation sites, roadside attractions, cabins, and the folks who hunted and fished and packed into this country, and who had done that for generations already at that point, could not believe that that was the future the Forest Service had envisioned for this landscape, with grizzly bears and other amazing critters that you just don't have everywhere else in the lower 48. And led by Cecil Garland, a hardware store owner in Lincoln, Montana, citizens convinced their members of Congress to introduce legislation and protect the scapegoat wilderness. And in 1972, it was a monumental achievement. And it set in motion most every wilderness designation since then has been because of citizen initiation. That is how wilderness at the federal level is done. The Forest Service recommends some places for wilderness, but it takes citizens to actually get it across the finish line. And so this was a choice that citizens made to protect a wildland. And choice is the theme of the conversation today. How am I doing on time? I'm probably already going way too slowly. This is a wonderful quote by Bob Marshall from a place that I cherish, the Five Ponds Wilderness. He wrote this in his journal while visiting the Five Ponds when he was 21 years old. It was so pleasant as we lay down to reflect that we were in the heart of attractive virgin timber about 40 miles square, and yet we could not help regretting that there should be so very few of such tracts left due to the almost criminal lack of foresight of our legislatures of the 19th century. Just a powerful quote for a 21-year-old exploring what is still to this day the largest block of old growth that we know of, I think, east of the Mississippi River. Bob Marshall tragically passed away at the age of 38 years old. I am 39, and I have spent this whole year wondering, what have I gotten done in the 38 years that came before this, and what will I get done in the next 20 years that I'm in my professional life, 30 years, 40 years, who knows if retirement might be possible. But that brings me to thinking about wildlands and woodlands, which is a wonderful vision that was laid out first in 2005 for the state of Massachusetts, expanded later to all of New England. I remember seeing this first wildlands and woodlands report in between high school and starting up college at UMass Amherst. This was inspiring to me that there were people, thank God, in New England thinking about wild places. I was worried that wild places weren't on the map. They weren't on the radar. I had a lot of hope seeing that Wildlands and Woodlands first report. But since then, my hope is still there. My optimism is there. That's why I go to work every day. But I am tired of waiting for more wildlands. I'm just going to be blunt about it. Because the needle hasn't moved much since 2005, with a couple of notable exceptions, especially for public lands. And it seems like we're stuck, especially on that public lands front. And so the purpose of this talk that I'm giving today, if you haven't noticed already, is how can we find the courage to make a choice? Because wildlands are a choice. Wildlands are a choice that we are capable of making. So I could show you maps and statistics about old growth, but you don't need to hear that from me. There are amazing experts here to talk about all of those things who have already talked about those things today. You know about the loss of old growth across the country. You've probably seen this map before. I'm gonna mostly breeze through that. But the reason I'm bringing up that map is that when we only talk about old growth, not to diminish the importance of talking about old growth and to understand old growth and to really study it and map it, as Bob Leverett has encouraged us to do. But if we get lost in the debate about what is or is not old growth, we will miss the forest for the trees. That is why wildlands are my driving passion. I love old growth, but I think we could do a lot for our forests if we spent a fraction of the amount of time that we spend on old growth trying to make sure that we have more wildlands. And so here's the crest of the Green Mountains. Red Loaf is more or less just out of the picture here. This is the Telephone Gap landscape that you've maybe heard about in the news. The Forest Service has applied 4 different definitions of old growth, and what has it gotten us? A very slightly changed project from what it started from, and a wildland, small W wildland, compromised as a result of this proposal, including major logging in a roadless area, logging of stands over 150 years of age, just tragic. Like I said before, these blank spots on the map are what drive me, and we're lucky to still have blank spots on the map here in the Northeast. But keeping them is going to take a lot more decisive action than we've taken to date. Bob Marshall knew that it wasn't just about protecting the old growth that he enjoyed in the Five Ponds Wilderness. He knew it was also imperative to protect more wild places. This is the view from Ampersand, a beautiful hike with wonderful old growth at the beginning, up to one of the best views in the high peaks at the end. And, Bob knew intimately the cut over, burned over areas of the Adirondacks and cherished those lands as much as he also cherished those tracts of old growth, knowing that what they would become someday. And it was that vision for wild places that drove Bob in his later years to come up with this amazing map of the largest roadless landscapes in the lower 48 states. Where should we make sure we have, large wildlands protected? This was his suggestion with the cartographer Althea Dobbins in 1936. This is what he was saying should be our, our minimum baseline of wildlands in the United States. So today, I'm going to just breeze through some of this stuff. Today, we've heard this already. 3.3% of New England protected as wildlands. And if we're going to get to 20%, which is, thank David Foster for upping the ante this morning. That was a wonderful statement that he made. Because, of course, there's no such thing as too much wildlands. Let's just be clear about that. How are we going to get to that 20%? Well, in New England, we have far fewer public lands than other regions of the country. 11% of our region is state and federal public land. But while that, of course, makes private land conservation very important, it also means that 11% is, I would say, even more important. Those public lands that we have here in the Northeast are that much more important because of their scarcity. And because they tend to be older forests than we have on private lands in New England. They store more carbon. There's all these reasons why. Larger roadless areas. But right now, we are losing ground. This slide has way too much text, but I'm gonna explain why. This is the White Rocks National Recreation Area. In 1984, the Vermont Wilderness Act designated the White Rocks NRA in order to preserve and protect its existing wilderness and wild values and to promote wild forest and aquatic habitat. In the forest plan for the Green Mountain National Forest in 1987, the White Rocks was one of the areas managed for the development of future old growth. White Rocks NRA is not considered suitable for timber management. So what happened in 2019? When the early successional habitat creation project on the Green Mountain National Forest approved hundreds of acres of logging, perhaps thousands, in the White Rocks National Recreation Area. 6,000 acres in the roadless area, across several roadless areas in the Green Mountain National Forest. How is that going on right now? We're losing ground as we speak on public lands. At the beginning, you had that QR code that I hope you'll go back to and go to our website and learn more about this and take action by tomorrow. But the Trump administration has decided to put our most important regulation that probably Americans haven't ever heard of, the roadless rule, put it in the crosshairs. The roadless rule protects 1/3 of our national forest system from most road building and logging, not all. It protects amazing places, our largest old growth forest in the United States, in the Tongass National Forest. And it protects 260,000 acres of our Green Mountain and White Mountain National Forests. That's more land than is protected by the Wilderness Act right now in the White and Green Mountain National Forests. The roadless rule is a critical tool to making sure that we maintain the small W wildlands that we have right now, and hopefully someday moving them into the big W wildland status. Many of our most cherished landscapes, Franconia Notch, the slopes of the Presidential Range, they're only protected because of the roadless rule. The parts of the White Rocks National Recreation Area that weren't logged in the early successional project were protected by the roadless rule. It's a really important regulation, and right now the Trump administration is proposing to rescind the entire rule. So please go and fill that out, and there will be a few more things to take action on in a second. This is ongoing. We have roadless areas that I'll just go back to for 1 second. The roadless areas in purple are the ones that are protected by the roadless rule, and then we have roadless areas that are equal in every way, except they were mapped after 2001. Those are the teal areas on the map here, like the 16,000 acre Pittman inventory roadless area in the Telephone Gap landscape that aren't protected by the roadless rule, simply because the Forest Service has chosen not to update the roadless rule map since 2001. And those areas have been systematically logged in just about every logging project on federal lands in recent years. So I'll just skip ahead here. Are we losing ground on state lands? You know, we talked this morning a little bit, John and David did, about permanence and the durability of our wildland protections. How durable is a Vermont natural area if there's a very real possibility of building a new gondola through the middle of one of them, the Mount Mansfield Natural Area? And what we've learned is that our natural areas in Vermont, just like David was talking about, forest reserves in Massachusetts, don't have the statutory authority to maintain their permanence. So it's critical that we don't rely on the tools that have kind of gotten us by for the last several decades, and that we put in place real tools. So quickly, because I'm running out of time here, Act 59 in Vermont gave us a way to envision a better future for the state. And we can take action on that vision by passing the Vermont State Wildlands Act, which I hope you'll learn more about by going to vermontwildlandsact.org. But really quickly, it would move Vermont from about 4%, depending on how you define it, wildlands today, to about 7% in wildlands. And it would put about 70% of Vermont's state lands into wildlands management. A hugely important bill, sponsored by a person who's here at the conference who you should go talk to, our amazing representative from Middlebury, Amy Sheldon. And let's talk about national parks for our federal lands here in New England. This is not a new topic. The Green Mountain National Park was an idea of long ago. Let's bring that back to talk about how our White Mountain and Green Mountain National Forests could be managed differently going forward. And unfortunately, Restore the North Woods, which has been leading this cause for many years, isn't here to speak today, but they're really the people to talk to. And it need not come at the cost of our timber supply in New England. 2.3% of our timber harvest volume in the New England states on an annual basis comes from our state and federal public lands. That's it. 2.3%. If we were to turn off that spigot, we would have 11% wildlands tomorrow, more than we have today. Well, minus the percentage or two that are currently protected as wildlands. And as we've already talked about, 20% is within sight for wildlands protection. So what's holding us back? And I'll come to the close here. Whether or not a landscape is old growth is a matter of wonky scientific debate that will go on forever. This conference will keep happening every 2 years, and we will keep debating what the cutoff is for old growth. It's arbitrary to some extent, no matter how you define it. But wildlands are a choice. And I have to correct John Elder on one thing that he said just now. There are not two wilderness acts. This is very important. There's one wilderness act. And then there was an Eastern Wilderness Areas Act that passed in 1975. And what did that say? That was Congress telling the Forest Service, no, Forest Service, there is no purity test. It can be wilderness if Congress wants it to be wilderness. And the question is, do we want more wildlands? There is no threshold for what qualifies as a wildland. If we wish it to be a wildland, it should be a wildland. So how are we going to get to that 20%? Let's band together and find the courage to make more public wildlands. And I hope to continue this conversation with you all over the social hour later. Here are some things that you can do. Maybe we can pull this up during the Q&A if Chris would be okay with it so that we can get over to him. I'm sorry I've gone long. But thank you all so much. It's great to have you in the room today.